this amazing Sermon on the Mount.
This one's about the right height. So we are reading from Matthew chapter 5, and we're going to read from verse 1 to verse 12. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. For they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be, because great is your reward. Persecuted the prophets who were before.
Thanks, Jennifer. Good morning. Dobry ranko. In the days before Airbnb, like about 20 years ago, if you wanted to book a place to go and stay, you would have to use alternative methods. We used a magazine called Chez Nous to book a place in France. Owners would advertise their properties, and they would post maybe 2 pictures in the magazine, a summary description of the house, and some brief comments from previous tenants. Having read the description and seen the pictures, Bethel and I decided to book a place which was, quote, near the beach. It turned out this man was economical with the truth, and I still know his name. Let it go. He also had some hidden utility costs, like filling the water in the pool while we were there, even though we weren't using it, and charging us a water fee. So I wrote him some feedback, graciously. The only time I've ever done it, and I sent him an email, and I explained that his description was somewhat misleading. The fees could be clearer. However, to try to give some degree of comfort, I said it was an ideal location for us, but only because we had a car. He replied, thanking me for my constructive criticism, or feedback as he called it, and I thought that was the end of the matter. But no, it wasn't. Because in next year's magazine, in his description, he quoted some of my letter, my feedback as a customer. And this is what he said, ... ideal location, end quote, A. Brown, Saintfield. Honestly, that's the truth. He was a chancer. Talk about using bait and switch. Jesus could never be accused of this strategy. He was upfront with his followers about implications of following him right from the get-go. And this is what we are going to see today. We pick up the story towards the beginning of Matthew's Gospel. And there was a kind of sense of anticipation at the start of Jesus' public ministry. John the Baptist had drawn large crowds, and he said this, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near." And many went out and listened and were baptized in preparation for what was coming. And then Jesus started his public ministry, and he said the same thing, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near." He preached about the good news of the kingdom of heaven, and he healed every disease and sickness. And news was spreading about Jesus. There was no social media, but expectation was growing. Here was someone special. Could it be that he is the promised Messiah? Could he be the one that might deliver us from this oppressive Roman occupation? Momentum was growing, and large crowds who'd heard from word of mouth about what was happening, they started to come out to hear him in the surrounding areas from Jerusalem and Galilee. And that's in chapter 5 where we pick up the story that Jennifer read just now. Jesus retreated up a mountainside, we're told, and he sat down with his disciples and he started to teach them. I'm going to tell you how you know you're my disciples and how you are blessed. Have a think for a second. What would you think if you were one of his disciples at this point in the story? This was a great career move. It was a bit of a risk. Check out the crowds out there down the mountain. I'm almost a celebrity here. I'm one of the inner circle of this guy that's gathering fame. It's really quite exciting. Okay, teacher, I'm all ears. Some of these losers will be up in a wee minute or two, but we'll sit and talk. Let me know how I'm blessed and why. Tell me something of the inner secrets. And he began to teach. And what followed was not so much what you should do, it was more about who you will be. You see, it's easy to fool people through religious rule keeping. Really just takes a bit of discipline. But Jesus was looking deeper. He was looking at the heart level where even our motives come into view. And so he proceeded to list 8 characteristics of his followers that we will see. The first 4 are very much in the vertical dimension, devotion to God. And the second 4 are much more than about our relationship to others. What someone said, the first 4 about taking root, and the next 4 about bearing fruit. And so Jesus would also say about how they would bring blessing, both in the eternal future kingdom to come, but also in the present, because the kingdom was becoming a present reality that they could inherit now. And the amazing thing that they were about to discover, that God in his grace would not just save them, he would transform them. They didn't know, but they were about to become a work in progress. And so Jesus started. And he said this, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." I'm sorry. Poor? What? Poor? You see, when I think of poor, I think of someone who maybe needs to work for the basic essentials. And if they don't work, they're going to be struggling. Or they live on limited government benefits, where life is not easy. But this Greek word for poor, ptochos, is much more dramatic than that. It implies absolute, destitute poverty. It implies couching or recoiling, someone unable to save themselves. This was a negative word. Nobody would wish that on anyone. And Jesus said, blessed are the pohotos, or pototos. Blessed are the poor in spirit. This is someone who realizes they've nothing to give to God. They're inwardly bankrupt. Jesus is saying, you see, it wasn't the self-satisfied religious teachers who are blessed in God's kingdom. The blessed are those who already know they have nothing to give. The ones with no confidence in their own achievements. The ones who realize that they are wholly dependent on God for anything. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven, Jesus said. That person will enjoy the gift of God's acceptance. That person was more typically, however, found on the fringes of society. That's why Jesus said that his mission was good news to the poor. The foundation for being my disciple, Jesus was saying, is knowing that you have nothing of merit to offer God. This was not for the Pharisee who saw himself as rich in merit, or the zealots or extremists who wanted to conquer Rome by force. Suddenly, the citizenship of the kingdom of heaven was open to the rejects on the fringes of society who already knew what it was to be poor. This was a radical message, but it was foundational for discipleship. Understanding that personal bankruptcy is the first step. To know that it starts with acknowledging that I'm helpless to save myself before a just and holy God. So much for being a celebrity, they might have thought. And so Jesus goes on. And the next one, he says, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Mourn, a strong word, kind of used in bereavement or a passionate lament. Jesus, it seems here in this context, is primarily talking about the sorrow of personal feelings before God. This is about dealing with the shortcomings, the sin in my own life seriously, not brushing it off as, well, I'm just like anyone else. Having an ache in my soul about my personal shortcomings. But how could I be blessed when I mourn? How could I be happy to be unhappy? How are the blessed, in a sense, how are they blessed when they're mourning? Because they will be comforted, Jesus says. The emphasis here, you see, is not that we live in a perpetual state of mourning, but that we take our feelings to God and we receive from him comfort and peace. Peace of knowing that I'm accepted and I'm forgiven and what has been has passed. Sometimes, especially in my job, I get the privilege of praying with people who are troubled, who long for their words, peace. And in all honesty, I struggle to know what words to say because I can't promise him the peace that I know outside a relationship with Christ. This is something you have to experience to understand peace with God. You see, Jesus' nature is to offer life, not burden of guilt. In Matthew chapter 11, Jesus says something, and the Message paraphrase puts it this way. This is what Jesus said: are you tired? Are you worn out? Are you burnt out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. My disciples are blessed because they will be comforted. Do you know that peace? Have you forgotten some of that peace? All of these characteristics are for his followers. He offers it to the spiritually bankrupt who realize their own feelings. And so Jesus goes on to the next one and he says this: blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Often today, meek is thought of as weak. It's not certainly how I see the world working at the minute, where the powerful seem to be, or the bullies seem to be the ones that get their way. I'm sure, like me, you've followed with interest the postmaster scandal on the news, the appalling bullying and power that was exerted to people who ended up, in some cases, as we know, going to prison, and in some cases even taking their own lives. The meek. The meek person is someone who is humble, you see, and gentle and courteous, someone who knows their limitations and failings, but they also know God's grace, and in that they're fully accepted, and that gives them assurance. In the Greek word for meek, there's a kind of connotation of a strong animal that has learned to accept control, its strength under control. My mother's family attended, when she was young, when she was a child, all through her childhood, they attended a very, let me call it, a religious church, where it seemed to her that adherence to appearance and rules and regulations were overemphasized. Even the idea of playing sport would be frowned upon as mixing too much with worldly ways. Although that was the church context, my mother's father, my grandpa, he was a very different man. He was gentle and courteous. He had an infectious faith. He read, he learned, and often quoted the Bible, not in a self-righteous way, but because he loved God. Interestingly, each of his 3 daughters all thought that they were his favorite. It was only in adulthood they discovered that the others all thought the same. I thought that was cool. I told my 2 daughters that, and they said, "So what one's your favorite?" Much to his delight, the 3 daughters were selected for the City of Derry Ladies Hockey Club to play on the team. And they were featured in the press, and there was a picture of the 3 of them on the sports page, and he was chuffed. Well, that evening, not unsurprisingly, my grandfather got a visit from the elders, having noticed the picture in the paper. They were treated courteously to a cup of tea, and one said, "Bobby, if they were my daughters, they wouldn't be playing for City of Derry Hockey Club." The girls were in the next room secretly listening to the conversation, anxiously. And my grandfather thought, and he gently and confidently answered, "You're right. They wouldn't be. But they're my girls, and I'm proud of them. They've done nothing wrong." Nothing more was said. They left shortly after. He was strong. He was humble. He depended on God. He loved his girls, and he was meek. And because of what my mum experienced in her dad, she saw past the cold, self-righteous religion to the grace that her father had found in Jesus. And even though the elders treated him appallingly at times, he wasn't intimidated. He walked the earth humbly with a knowledge that he was a child of God. He was accepted and he was loved. You see, the meek person is gentle and not intimidated because they have an audience of one. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. And now Jesus turns his attention to the next character of a follower. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. I was thinking about this. I was remembering what Paul had talked about, his thirst up the mountain. My idea of being parched is getting out of bed at night for a cup of water because of the Chinese I had earlier that night. But many listening to Jesus would have understood very clearly, better than us, what it meant to be hungry or thirsty in a hot, barren wilderness. Jesus promised when we come to him hungry and thirsty, not for material things, but for spiritual, that we will be filled. Sorry, if we are his followers. And so far, these Beatitudes have involved relationship with God, this vertical dimension. The kingdom of heaven belongs not to those who are self-satisfied, but those who know that they are spiritually bankrupt. Comfort and peace comes not by ignoring my own personal feelings and sin, but by grieving over it and bringing it to God, keeping a short account. And that those who live under God's control can walk with his acceptance. And those who hunger and thirst for righteousness will find satisfaction in his presence. And now we start to see how these characteristics of the vertical start to impact the relationship that we have with others, the horizontal. And Jesus goes on to say, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy." Merciful, maybe the disciples thought. Mercy. We want ruthless justice against this occupying Roman Empire. You see, justice is getting what is deserved. And they rightly wanted justice. Mercy, however, means not getting what you deserve. And there is a place for justice, and God is just. But the context here, I think, more refers to compassion for people in need. It's interesting that when I get wrong done to me, I want justice. But when I do wrong, I seek mercy. The Aramaic word for mercy, which is the kind of language that Jesus would have been using, is to get right inside the skin of someone, to see things from their perspective, to feel it with their feelings. And that's exactly, if you think about it, what God did for us in Jesus. He got into our skin. That's mercy. I was talking to a friend of one of my daughters who was visiting here last week. He lives in California, and inevitably we got on to politics. Not the smartest move. But I was really challenged by what I heard from him. The personal hurt that he felt at examples of injustice faced by others different to him. It was like an ache within him because he hated the injustice that he saw. I think that's the mercy that we're talking about here, where it drives not just a feeling but action. And Jesus' followers will be blessed, for they will receive mercy. This implies to me, when you sort of think of it, because the mercy is given to us, but the extent to which I appreciate the mercy that I've received, to that extent will impact the mercy I show to others. It's good to sit with that at times, to remember the grace that I've received and the mercy that God has given me. And it will impact others, the mercy I show to others. And so Jesus goes on to say, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." This word for pure just means literally unmixed. How pure are your motives and my motives for the things we do, even the good things we do? This is how the Message paraphrases Jesus' teaching. Be especially careful when you're trying to be good, so that you don't make a performance out of it. Oops. It might be good theater, but God who made you won't be applauding. John Bunyan once was told he preached well one day. I like his reply. He said, "Yeah, the devil already told me that as I was coming down the pulpit steps." A pure in heart is about inward purity, about our motives, why I do what I do. Not talking about outward ceremonial rituals, because God is ultimately interested in authenticity and sincerity. And so he goes on to the next. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. After all, Jesus is called the Prince of Peace. As kingdom citizens, we're called to pursue peace, not conflict. Conflict, however, may be inevitable at times, even because of our faith. But conflict should not be our desire. We're not talking about keeping the peace or avoiding offense, because sometimes peacekeeping involves offending. But it is God who is the author of peace and the devil who is the troublemaker. In the second half of the 20th century in South Africa, most of us know this, the tensions were high between black and white because of the racial segregation that was being experienced. And Bishop Desmond Tutu preached, we can't accept apartheid because the Bible says we must love our neighbours as ourselves. At funerals for school children who had been killed by the police, Bishop Tutu would often start by saying this: if you're here to support the families who are mourning, welcome. If you're here because you are grieving, welcome. If you're here because you want to spy on us, welcome. If you're here as the security police, ready to shoot us, welcome. We love you. You belong to us and we belong to you. If you want to be on God's side, come join us. We can end this. God is sad when he looks at how we're fighting with one another. Tutu was a peacemaker. The peacemaker is someone in whose presence bitterness cannot live. Blessed are the persecuted, he goes on to say. Tough one, this one. Because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You see, the values of the kingdom of heaven, wholesome as they are in stark contrast to the culture of this world. Not saying we don't see evidences of that around us, but often they will bring resentment. For many of Jesus' disciples, it would even lead to death. In our culture, death is unlikely, but mockery and insult and social isolation, embarrassment is possible. And when you face any of this, rejoice because of the reward that you will receive, Jesus says. And so there are 8 characteristics of the follower of Jesus. My youngest daughter, Ellen, who saw the new year in with 30 of her friends over from various countries, all connected to Muskoka Woods in Canada. Bethel and I had the privilege of meeting and chatting to some of them from different countries, mostly Germany, New Zealand, Australia. I'm not sure. They didn't all come just to see the new year in with Bethel, or with Ellen. It's definitely not to Bethel. She's good to see the new year in with. But here's the thing, we got talking to them before we headed off to another party, which was Tara's wedding party. And in one conversation with a guy, he told me he was pursuing social work. I could tell that he was a follower of Jesus, not by what he was pursuing, but by the motive, by the attitude, by the grace he showed. He was pursuing social work because he hated seeing children separated from their families. Another one had come to faith a couple of years ago, and she was working for a charity seeking to find homes for the homeless. Again, it wasn't what they were doing, it was how they spoke. And I left overflowing with joy. I was so encouraged, not just because my daughter was mixing with such good stock, but because I saw evidence of the work of God in lives that had started with a surrender. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, Jesus said. You see, Jesus was inviting his followers, and he invites you and me to allow God's kingdom to invade their lives, and they were going to get transformed, and make no mistake about it, they did. It took a bit of a journey, and they were still being transformed, most of them even to their own martyrdom. The Beatitudes, you see, offer not some hope of what could be, some ideal, but the blessedness is not promised to some future glory only. He invites you and me into his kingdom to peace, to relationship, to fullness of life, that we could be meek. But the foundation is starting with knowing that I have nothing to give, and all I can do is accept your grace. If you don't know him, you'll only understand a bit of what I'm talking about. If you do, this is an invitation, I would say, to more. Not religion, but relationship. And in our spending time with him, it will bear fruit. Won't make us celebrities, but we'll have life and purpose. That's why we are blessed if we follow him. Cheers.